Hello everyone, I am filming a tutorial for YouTube. As you can see, this was my story on Instagram where I asked you guys to vote for your favorite, and it was a really close call, but we are going with number 4, the wave. So just before we begin, this is an A4 canvas from Procreate, and in my case I'm going to halve this because it will take me half as long. So you can go ahead and do that if you like. I've chosen the A4 canvas preset because of let me show you. You can see the DPI, which is the dots per inch, I believe, and directly links to the resolution, so it's a high resolution. And it is also set to the sRGB color profile, which is brilliant for seeing this on screen. If you want to print it commercially, you'd have to choose CMYK, but also the colors change. So anyways, I'm going to bring up the reference real quick and then we can go ahead. Just to show you quickly, I got this from Pinterest, among many other wave illustrations, paintings, and AI art, particularly that one. But this is obviously an artwork by someone. If you can tell me who this is, I'm happy to credit them below. But yeah, we're going to try and learn with the help of this beautiful reference. Alright, so let's choose our background color first. It looks like it's a reddish, desaturated, something like this. Probably slightly more red and grayer in the actual painting, but that's fine. And we're going to be starting with my hard shading brush, and if you don't have access to that, the hard airbrush will do a good job too. I'm going to start by grabbing a darker turquoise color, and this will be sort of the edge to the really dark areas and just sort of mapping out where that shadow lies. The wave itself is more turquoise and warm versus the ground part, which is more blue. So I'll go ahead and grab something more blue like this, slightly lighter, and just add that next to it. This. I haven't done a wave tutorial before, so I'm intrigued to see how this will work out. I'll choose a slightly darker turquoise color here, just below that ridge here. And then it goes into more of a greenish one right there. So I'll choose a slightly darker, greener turquoise color. This step is all about sort of gathering the different colors and starting to shape out the shape of this. So it's easiest for me to start with shadows, so I will also continue with this darker one now, which is sort of in between the turquoise and the blue, the darker blue. I don't know if this is the right shade I'm looking for, but initially the shadow itself is more important than the color anyways. We can always change the color after. So yeah, as you can see, fairly rough, uneven paintbrush strokes, if you want to call it that. Then I'll choose a slightly lighter color, going into the more saturated direction up here, staying in the same color on the color wheel, which is the hue, and just sort of blending it in gently along this area. The shadow that I'm painting in right now, that isn't quite the darkest yet. If you look at the reference photo, you can see it's sort of going along here and following this darkest area. There's a slight bump here where it's brighter, so I'll leave this shadow away from that, but right after this bump, it will continue. Alright, and then at the top as well, although it's more turquoise, green, there's also a slightly darker shadow up there this. Okay, and now going in and choosing an even lighter one, moving into the direction of this here. I'm going to stick with this blue hue and not go into any greener area right now, just to see it's not light enough. Grab a lighter one and just add this gently to see how it looks and correct from there basically. So this is obviously quite bright compared to what we've put down thus far, and in the reference photo you can see that there is an ombre here from really dark going over gradient into light. So this here is too bright, so I'm just going to grab something slightly more saturated, going to the right is more saturated, and slightly darker, and just add that border there. It's better, but it's still too bright, and also I'd like to go a little bit more into the cooler blue tones just for the gradient here, like this. I think with anything that you are trying to paint or illustrate or draw from based on a reference, trying to shape out the shadows first and then continuing with lighter and lighter shades of whatever you're choosing will help get this all sort of into the making of the actual shape. Oh god, I hope you understand what I'm talking about. I've just color picked this area here, and I want to grab a slightly lighter color that is here at the end, creating this sort of pull upwards, following the imaginary white line that comes up there from the whitewash that ripples over this area. But I'm going to continue with this here first, and here you can see there is obviously some shadow from, you know, the foam that isn't being lit. That is quite blue, and I'm going to go really desaturated into the gray area, sticking with the same brush, just adding this up here. This is also going to by the looks of it, you know, create this sort of boundary below the white foam. So I'm just going to, where I imagine that it will fall over, create this little line here. Not more than that right now, because I want to continue shading this area here, which will lead into the lightest part. So and warmer as well. So I'm going to move the hue up to the green a lot more and a lot lighter. Add that and see what you think. I'm glad that the background is so warm, because with these airbrushes or the hard shading brush from my pack, they do let a lot of the background color come through, and that is really nice with these turquoise colors. So I'm just adding the really light color to the edge here, just a little bit. You can see the lighter area here is sort of patchy a little bit, isn't it? And that's probably because the wave isn't thick in exactly the same way across the line, so a bit of natural sort of patchiness like that. And then at the very top of this, I'm also going to add some of this really light turquoise green just here, which will automatically also I see I've sort of planned the shape a lot larger than I have made it. I'm just going to set this higher a little bit, this line, like that, going a little bit darker and even warmer, because up here you can see there's a shadow, or it's a slightly darker color than the lighter one we've been using, and it's a lot warmer. Gently adding this in here, perhaps as a transition from the very top. That will be the thinnest, like that, and even slightly darker, like that. Then going back to this really dark shade that I've used here that looks near purple at the moment, just going to add some of that in again here. So it sort of goes from here to here. And I will also take some of this top bit away. I have overestimated the shape of how large it was going to be at that part. But that's the cool thing about, you know, sort of gently easing your way along with the values and the colors, because you sort of figure out the shape with it. Right, so this area here, it looks like there needs to be a slightly darker color here in blue, more a cooler blue. Sort of here. Very vibrant as well, and actually slightly warmer. So I'll just add a little bit of this color in. And then here in this area, you can see in the reference, there are some more shadowy parts in there. So, you know, you can just color pick this if you want, or you can just, you know, choose it without and just go slightly darker. And then I zoom out a lot because it helps me keep the brush at the same size and, you know, not have to worry about what I'm doing over there. And not paint too large of shapes in there by accident. I'm just adding these two shadowy areas. There is a much cooler blue in there as well, so I'll just move this here and here and add that in the same lightness. Maybe go slightly lighter on that one actually, like that. Then go back to the turquoise, blue, and just add a lighter value in between this one and the ridge that we were already sort of shaping out. Interestingly, there is another dark patch here, so I will go in with the same dark green that we've had just now. Just add that in here. And then here along the white wash line that goes down, there are some more dark green patterns here, there, and there. So I will just sort of, imagining the line going down here, I'll just add this in here and here. Which leads us to the really dark part again, because the shadow here isn't deep enough and not cool enough, and I really want to shape that out first before I continue. So I'll try this color, or deeper blue, keeping it the same darkness as that dark green that we just used. That's a little bit too purple. Try this out. This is still very purple, I have to admit. Whoops. So I'm going slightly lighter and a little bit more into the warmer hues. Sort of following the line along here as well. I'm not sure if this shade will fully work yet, but it's definitely an improvement to what I've had thus far. And I'll also add it slightly more here. Coming up a lot more. Like this. Perhaps it's time that we added some of that whitewash. But first, I'm going to color pick the lighter area down here. And I will add a little bit of shadow into this. So going slightly darker into the more saturated direction. And then choosing a slightly cooler hue, I will just add a little bit of like a squiggle across the surface, almost mimicking the shape that the whitewash is going to take on down here. And this will sort of be the shadow to it, but it will just look a lot more natural, I guess, for me if I'm painting this and there's already a little bit of shape to this color. There we go. I really hope everything's recording, but I think so. Alright, and then over here we can just add slightly more transition. Maybe going a little bit cooler and quite a bit darker here, just to add this color in between. That is quite cool. As you can see here, that's cool, and then it goes into the turquoise shades and shadow. And you don't have to stick to the reference in shape and all that. Because this was chosen by you guys, I am going to stick to it a little bit, but also you can see I'm going into a slightly more downward direction compared to this. It's quite sharp rise. And then I'm just going to add this here as well, a little bit more into this shadowy area that it is supposed to be. Here you can see it sort of goes up, and in that it also has more of a shadow that is a bit brighter going up here. So still using a cool blue, but not as cool as the really dark shadows that I've added. I'm just going to add that bit of rise here, like that, and it already looks a lot better. Okay, so for the white, I'm going to select a new layer. I'm still sticking with the same brush, and I'm not going to choose, a full white. I'm going to choose an off-white blue that is in this hue, because it will allow us to add a much brighter white after that is also more tinted in a warm hue. So I'm just going to add this here at the top, and sort of try and follow the reference a little bit in the dips. Here there's a dip here that shows a bit of the back wave, and there's a first little bump here that comes down, stays up here. This is where the shadow is. Alright, from here on I probably will have to make it up by myself because I've already lost where I am in the reference. So I'm just going to add these squiggles for some white. The main thing is that you sort of keep a watch on where is the lightest part of the wave, and that is what I'm doing right now with this color, or rather sort of trying to build the base for where that will happen. Sort of goes down over here. There's a really bright fall down here, and there's a bunch of foam going over there. Alright, gently shading this in so that I'm not covering too much of the turquoise below, because that can be really helpful for a bit of color, variation. Alright, and then I will choose a slightly lighter color, make the brush really small, keep this canvas small like this because it's easier to keep the overview, and just sort of start adding your whitewash lines that come down. So I'm following this line first, and then it sort of goes outwards where there's a little strand that goes to the left, and then mainly it goes down, dips down here, and then it goes and follows a scraggly line to the bottom. I'm going to make this a bit softer than the reference. With these lines you can really indicate the shape of your wave, so by me not going down really sharp but a bit more like gently easing it off, it will look a bit rounder and softer. Then we've got little lines going up. Sort of imagine how the wave will just sort of go upwards, and with your colors you've already given yourself a bit of a guidance with this, because you can follow the shadow to see where the wave dips and where it rises. So here there is obviously a rise going up, dips down, got a couple of little sprinkles around here, and you really can choose to go as lightly as you want or as strongly as you want with this. brush or generally with the airbrushes, because you can, you know, just not press too hard and go very, very steady. Then there is like, when you look at this here, there's obviously a lot going on here in tiny strokes. But if you focus on the larger lines first, you see that this one goes down, right? And then there is like a little droop and then it goes up to the right again. So you can choose how, you know, intense you want to make that. I'm just going to do one droop, and then it sort of goes and switches direction a bit. So there's like an outcropping here, and then I go back inside. Obviously I'm much further away from the wave than the reference right now, and that's okay. Just add a couple of lines here, and then there's like these outbowing ones that I quite like that. When I used to want to learn how to draw this stuff, I would just, you know, blindly scribble stuff down, but I figured that the intentionality behind these wave lines and stuff is what makes it so much more realistic, because you're really thinking about where does the wave drop down. Like here I'm going to add a slight drop going downwards. Where does it come out? How far away is it? Here I'm just going to add this little bend in so that, you know, it looks like it's coming outwards to the viewer. And here too. You can add parallel lines like here, or, you know, but I try to keep them sort of more horizontal than vertical because it keeps it pushed to the back, if you know what I mean. Right, then here, this one sort of fades out to the left, and I'm going to put one down as well. So this is sort of coming down, also differing from the reference. This is like a plateau up here, that's why there is such an intensity in color. It reflects or refracts the light that comes through, and is also really close to the darkest part, which indicates that it's a higher point. So by not getting these right down or anything, you can also show that off a little bit. Then we've got a couple of lines to indicate flow of water here, keeping them nice and, you know, pushed back. I think I can show you if you don't know what I mean with that, I'm just going to add a new layer and show you. So, you know, instead of going like this would sort of bring it much closer from the top, but instead by keeping it really tight, you can just sort of keep the illusion of it being backwards a lot more. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to merge it together because this is still the white lines. There's a bunch of stuff going on here, so I'm just going to add a little bit of shading here, bunch of whitewash foam dancing on the, and this also is reflecting the light, I believe, which is why the artist chose to smudge it out so much down and up, because of the motion blur. Here I want to have some more that sort of reach out. Like this, and just adding a couple more in here. Now you can go back like I am going back over lines which you feel should be stronger, you know, where either it catches the light more or there's just more foam. Like this, and here there's also a ledge here, right? So I'm sort of going a bit more horizontally across here. Indicating the upwards motion to the left, because the wave is curling over, so it goes sort of in this motion. Alright, Right, and then at the top here, you know how there's like either the white can be pulled along to the right, as in the reference photo, or you could indicate that the white is sort of climbing up, you know, indicating the curling a bit more. So that's what I'm trying to do with these little lines here. They're sort of going like this. Pulling along like that. Keeping some of that darker wave behind these whiter lines is also helpful because the wave doesn't just stop at the top, does it? It is a bigger shape behind it. All right, let's see, shall we continue with the white? I'm just going to add a couple more lines here and here, where there will be a lot more white coming down. And then I also tap out some of these little dots with the same brush to add a little bit more texture. Like that. And some over here, although this I think is just the spraying foam that the artist added here. Alright, and now I'm going to grab a white, a much brighter white, but I'd like to go into the warm color even, like this. And I'll create a new layer for this just in case I change my mind and I don't like it. Let's see how it looks. Much brighter. Maybe even brighter, like that. Yeah. I'll stick with this. Should I stick with this? I don't know. There's another brush that I think would be great, which is the chalk brush by Procreate, so it should be available to everyone. It already has a texture in it, so yeah, let's use that one. Let's use the chalk brush for a bit of variety. And basically, where you've added your blue foam now, I want to go and just add the very top parts of it in this bright white, because that will really enhance the depth perception of this foam, like that, and keeping little areas in between that are still just as blue below. There's a bit of spray up here, and sometimes this bright white foam, or should I call it orange, yellow, just to make it simple. The yellow foam, basically, sometimes it goes over the edge, right, as you can see here, and sometimes, and here, and other times the darker blue comes through first, indicating the shape of the foam crashing. Mainly at the top, although there are areas that you can see in the reference, in between the white are blue. Mainly at the top it is yellow because of the sunlight that is hitting it directly. Well, so far it's working out a lot better than I was hoping for, so that's great. I hope my explanations are making sense. And over here I want to get a bit more that sort of comes to the side, like in the reference. And then there's a huge shape here where it sort of goes up at the top here, and then it goes down almost in a straight line. And once again, I will sort of temper it a bit and just make it look a little bit more like it is falling in a curved way. Although, as you know, the ocean, it just is there's so much strength behind it that it could very well go down in a straight line. And then here as well, there's another bump up here, and we'll add some splatter in a moment. I'm just adding this here, coming down, And then there's a huge white bit here. Like that. To which I will add some darker gray or blue shadow rather in a moment, because I haven't added that here yet. So yeah, just sort of adding in this. While there is nothing to say, it might be a good moment in time to say that I have weekly PDF tutorials and monthly video tutorials on my Patreon. If you'd like to see more and like to support my stuff, then feel free to check that out. And also, I'm very active on Instagram, so if you want to see updates and you want to vote on this sort of stuff, then feel free to head over there and subscribe/follow to see the updates when they come out. All right. Like this, and yeah. I want to add more of that blue, shadowing the stuff that lies in the shadow. So wow, look at this pretty gradient. I'm going to go down into the blue, and I'm going to choose something that looks closer to purple. So sort of here, you can go even further if you like, but I think this will do. And not too dark, but just like this. See how it looks. That is definitely the lighter of the two, because as you can see there are two blue tones, one that is like this and one that is darker, and you can go ahead and just add either one first, but I'm going with the slightly lighter one first, and then I can add my darker one next to it as its shadow. So going a bit darker, just adding this sort of shadow, maybe even darker, to be honest. It's quite intense, the contrast. And it's too purple, so I'll go a bit more towards the cool blue and add some here. And also there is a little bit here in between, but it's not quite that dark, so I'm gonna go and choose a slightly lighter color, even lighter, whoops, and also more turquoise by the look of it. Coming over like this, and then there's a bit of turquoise here, like that. Then going back to the really yellow white light with the chalk brush still, and adding in the scribbles / little brush strokes. I wanted to curve it off a bit more, but it looks like I'm just following the reference now, so that's fine. Didn't go quite as planned. And then I want to go and grab something that is sort of lighter, that we did the first sort of bit of foam with, really. A light blue, giving this here some base. Like this, and then, you know, I feel like we need one more transitioning color. So how we've had this yellowish white, I'm gonna choose something slightly darker, very desaturated, sticking to the same color hue, so this yellow sort of color, and just adding that to the side slightly, sort of part of the shadow. Scribbling this over. All right. Yup. I would say we need another brush obviously here for the texture, and in my case I would like to use my own texture brush because I like how it works. But if you don't have access to my brushes, then feel free to go for the old brush, dry brush, or turpentine, although that's quite thick. So I would say the old brush or the dry brush should give you a similar texture effect. Oops, where are we? Hello. There we are. And then with the light one again, on a new layer, just in case you don't like it, increasing the size, go in and add some texture. I would even say perhaps go for a bright white, which will look even whiter, obviously, and just sort of go over that. Some areas where you think the splatter would be particularly large, like here, there, and up there. The good news is you can always erase it now, the things that are looking too splattery, too big. You can go in and erase it either with the same brush, or you can choose, you know, any of the other brushes really. Here I'd like to add a little bit more of this like light blue in that we had. Oops, hello. That was too big, like that. Momentarily distracted by my phone. Okay. Like sort of to the edge here. And here. And wherever in between you feel like you've gone too bright, you can see here obviously there are quite the color differences now in between, which is nice. I like that, so I'll go with that. And then here I'd really like to go and just add a bit more of this shadow. Whoa. Although it works a little bit, but no, it's too dark. Too dark. This is a more turquoise shadow. Alright, then I would like to continue with the actual wave colors and texture and all that. So I like the texture that I added here, and if you like yours too, you can merge it down. Obviously the downside is that eventually you won't be able to undo it anymore, so you can just keep it if you want. I think I would like to erase a little bit on the edge here, and also on the original white that I added. And to be honest, here where I have added my white foam, I would like to take away a little bit of this blue. That's a bit too intense for me, to be honest. Right here, keep it from touching the ground yet, like that. Allow some more of the turquoise to come through at the bottom. This is the only reason why I do layers, really, because I am at some point going to question some of it. Where else does it look too bulky? Here I'd like this little ridge to be a bit more apparent. And I think I'd like to take away a little bit of this blue, like that. Alright, you know what, I'm just going to leave it at the foam for now. I'm going to merge the foam together, but not with the blue beneath, and then I'll create a new layer on top, and let's continue with the wave and the wave structure. Okay, so with the, I think I'm gonna continue with the chalk brush. I'd like to, color pick this area here that is quite broad, and I'm going to choose a slightly darker color, and I'm going to take the opacity of the brush down a little bit, and then I'm just going to add a couple of streaks that sort of follow the movement of the wave. So in the reference photo you can see that the dark streaks are sort of heading to the left up to the top here, and then they go and follow the shape of the wave. And I will do something similar. So I'm just adding some of these darker streaks going up. here, and also at the bottom of this, the shadow it sort of throws onto the wave. Going a bit darker again, and even going slightly cooler in hue, I'm just going to add that bit here that extends to it, and just go downwards. Here I'd like to marry that up a bit with this, go a bit even lower in opacity for the brush and slightly larger, giving me a bit more room to sort of gently ease it in. Then we've got the really dark areas, which are actually even darker and even more turquoise, to be honest, up here. And I'm just going to try and add that in here. Following the sort of shape that I've created with my white foam and with the shadow before. Now I'm going to go even cooler in hue, slightly darker again, bigger with the brush, lower in opacity, so I can play around with it a bit more. And I'm going to add this here into this area. Note that I'm leaving space between the white wash here and this, because the ridge has got a bit more surface at the top. And then I'm going into more turquoise areas, slightly brighter, but still dark, and sort of merging it in this area here, which becomes a lot more turquoise. So go even more turquoise, even brighter again, adding that here into this little area that is brighter. Whoops. So this here obviously is too dark, right? I'll choose a lighter one and go even warmer because it's sitting on a ledge and that is not bright enough. So I'll go even lighter here, sticking with the hue. And then here in between this, you can see in the reference it's slightly darker. So you can color pick if you like, and then go darker from there, like so, and also giving this here a bit more shape. I'd like to add a slightly more saturated, darker area edge to this little ridge that comes down, like so. The chalk brush is quite nice because it gives you this sort of, crayon effect, but not being, too much like the crayon, because the crayon is quite unshapely. And then up here, I'll choose a slightly lighter color for this area. Doesn't matter which color you've picked, but I've stuck to this sort of turquoise. And here we are sort of trying to create these ridges that come down and drop down to the left as well, following the surge of the wave up there. And then also on the ridge here, that is where it's sort of brighter, and we can add this here as the ridge going up in here. Then there's a bit of a brighter area here going over. They meet in the reference photo, but in mine they won't meet. And then here there's a bit more brightness than we've added so far. In this gradient. Here. I'm going to go a bit cooler now, and I'm going to switch back to my hard shading brush because it's a bit softer and a bit easier to add in gently. I'm going to add that over one of these little blobs that I've just added, and it needs to be slightly darker, not stick out so much. Overall, I quite like this really soft look that we've got going up there. I'll choose an even darker color just to get this here combined, this little area. Then there is a really much brighter blue turquoise in here, but it's not that bright, but it's brighter than what we've had going up this ledge. And simultaneously there's also this darker edge to it, like the shadow of the ledge. I'm painting over the white line that I drew up here a bit, and I will do the same over here. Oops, that is really dark. With something similar, but so it blends in with the rest a bit better, so slightly darker. Alright, and then up here there is a little bit more shadow. Like this. I'm just gonna add a bit of shadow here too for the ridge, and the bit going over behind. Same here. Alright, and then over here on the edge as well. I'll make this in this slightly darker turquoise. And then when we're going down, we're going to go towards this cooler blue again, even darker to be honest. I'll make this a bit bigger, like here. Following the ridge. Alright, and since we've already added these, white streaks across, I will grab a color pick of this area that's lighter. I'll go a bit darker and also a bit cooler. And I'll add a shadow. Although it's not that apparent in the reference photo, I will add a bit of shadow in between just to make it look a little bit more like there is something sitting on the water surface. Like this. Over here and around these areas, you don't have to follow the lines precisely, but just adding a little bit of color duality is quite helpful, I think. And then she's added these brown areas here, and I wonder if that is because it's sort of washing ashore, or if it's a reflection of another thing in the water. But I won't worry about that. I quite like the colors we've got in this so far. A bit light, bigger for the edge, and then a little bit in here, just a couple of areas. Even darker at the back. Oops, we could even stay in that here where it meets the turquoise. There is another area here also where there should be darker shadows. I want to go back and add a bit more of this dark shadow over the chalk brush that we added earlier. Still quite turquoise, so I'll keep it in that color here too. Deepening these little aspects, and then the same over here, sort of adding a darker turquoise and leading up into the wave. That's a lot darker here. With little brush strokes that sort of head into the wave, if you know what I mean. Following those lines that you've added if you like. And then over here. And now I'll go into the colder blue and add a darker blue here, where the shadow is probably at its most dark. Okay. Here also I want to add a generally cooler blue and slightly darker, because there will be more shadow from that overhanging thing, foam. and perhaps even a lot more water activity happening, so it's darker beneath as well. Okay, and now just to sort of make this edge a bit prettier, I'm just going to add some of this lighter blue back outside. Alright, yeah, so now it's really for the fine detailing. If you're happy with the shape you've got, I want to add a lot more foam, and I also want to add, you know, obviously little like foam, what are they called? Sprinkles? I think you know what I mean. Anyways, let's start with the foam though. So I'll grab the chalk brush again, whoops, because that was really nice. I'll put it up to its full opacity and I'll go in with the, well, let's just go with this like orange on a new layer, and then you can go ahead and just sort of add this to where you feel most of the foam is going to be collected, which is sort of, you know, in the middle of the reference there, and then on the some of these little bends of the water circle thingies here. I find it quite hard to focus on both speaking and painting sometimes, so I'm sorry if there's that I don't say anything that makes sense sometimes, if it doesn't make sense. Just up here there's a little bit of a reflection, and you know, on that note I'm going to brighten this bit here a tiny bit, like this, and also in here. What a difference it already makes. Scraggling out here, foam underneath the wave. There's some coming down here in the reference. If you don't know, if one of your, you know, parts of the wave looks like there isn't any shape to it or something, then you can just add a few more lines, you know, to indicate the shape. And then I'll go in with the lighter blue, but that is obviously darker than the white. Turn down the size of the chalk brush and just add a little bit of an edge to some of these whiter areas that are quite intense, especially here in the shadow, so that they are a bit more contextualized. Adding some finer lines in between for a bit more detail. Like this. That is pretty good. We can add some splatters. Let us add some last details. And that is us done, to be honest. So I'd like to use this Grainy Detail Brush from my set. And as an alternative, I would still recommend going with the chalk brush. I'll quickly just show you the difference between them. So this one would be sort of this texture with a clean shape, and the chalk brush would sort of be, you know, this texture with, you know, this shape instead of a round one. So, you know, it's definitely a fine alternative, which I would be using if I didn't have my brushes. And with this, I will now go and add these little sprinkles in areas. It also is just great to add a couple of little lines. I mean, I really like how this area is really smooth. I know it's not in the reference, and probably realistically it wouldn't be Okay, let's just go ahead and add some lines. Not sure if I want to stick with this. No, I don't want to stick with this brush. And this is where the chalk brush comes in handy, because it has a softer edge. And I will go and just really turn the opacity of the brush down and just very gently add these little lines indicating the flow and the shadow and everything. These colors are so pretty. And then here I'd like to add a little better transition, so I'll go into a more saturated blue, and I want to add this here below. This. And I want to add an even more saturated turquoise, to be honest. That is reflected here, as you can see in the reference. Oops, hello. In the reference, it's blue, and then there's like a little refraction of turquoise, and it's blue all around as it goes into the shadow. And this little turquoise bit can make all the difference, and I want to have it a lot more intense. Going back to the blue and slightly darker. Well, I'd like to get this shade and just make this hide a bit more. Like this. And then down here, adding a bit darker, more saturated. Even darker and saturated areas like this, and also perhaps following this ledge a bit, the shadow from the foam that is sitting on the surface here. And I don't really want it to be directly beneath the white because it won't look as thick, the ledge. Just leaving a bit of space in between, and then going even more saturated and darker to meet this area of shadow. I used to save all these photos when I was younger, and I wonder if I would have been able to paint them using this tutorial, because back then I tried to paint them and I failed. I didn't persevere, and I didn't understand why it didn't work. But it's all about carving out the shape from shadows and light, and understanding how the colors work together, I guess. And how to identify the colors is probably the biggest part. Here, this shadow that comes out, I just want to add a bit more. I'm going to turn the opacity right up, and I want it to, you know, be a bit more intense here, just underneath some of this whitewash. Probably too intense. All right. Okay, here there looks like there's a lot more. I'm gonna go dark again and slightly cooler, because it looks like there's a lot more shading going on here in the actual reference. Just going to add that hint of extra shadow, and I sort of want to smudge that out, and I want to use the hard shading brush, to be honest, because it's smoother. So with the hard shading brush, I'm just gonna add a couple more shadowy lines here. So I've color picked this green, and I'm just going to add a couple of lines of this darker green going up into the wave. Then I want to add a bit more turquoise, but a colder turquoise here, and sort of comes through this area a bit more, separating the darkness from the foam. And probably want to make that colder, to be honest, just underneath the foam. Maybe even just contextualize it a little bit better with a slightly darker color, but not as dark as the bottom one. Alright, and then up here I just want to add one more darker shade, and then I'm going to move to the final details. And perhaps here as well. I know it's quite a purple shade that the artist used there, but I'm going to go with the color from here because it looks like she's reflected that in here. I'm assuming it's a she, I don't know. There was this famous YouTuber when I was younger who did a lot of these wave paintings, and it looks like her style, that's why I'm sort of assuming it, but I have no idea what her name was. And then here just adding a bit of this as extra shadow, carving out some of these blotches to be more in the light. Okay, and you know what? I think that is that. Let's add some final details. I'll go in on a new layer for these with the Grainy Detail Brush, and again as an alternative, maybe even the studio pen if you want to have a clean defined dot. That's what I used to use all the time. And with this light gray, blue, white, I'm just gonna go and add some of these sprinkles around the areas that look like they are the brightest and the foamiest. Just adding these into the mix. I'm still zoomed out this far, and I'm going to lower the opacity too, because it's easier for me to see where the details make sense. Where I have got too many details, where I don't have enough details, all that stuff really. I'll go in and add this stuff here. And then some here. Some coming down over here, and at the top here I'll even increase the opacity right to the top again. And then I'm going to do the same with the really bright yellow orange highlight that we had for a bunch of this foam. Afterwards, I'll go even darker first though, and I'm just gonna add some of these sprinkles in the background. Here, here. These are more intentional details really, you know. For this outside I'll use something else because I do want to add some that are a bit more broad and not that intentional. So here I'm going to just add a couple more bright blue ones, and here as well. With a love for detail, you could probably spend ages on this, and I certainly have, not only in the past, but I still do on some pieces. But I know it's also nice to get to the end, so let's go ahead and create a new layer. Alright, so with the dry brush and a light orange yellow, I'll go in and just increase that size and just go ahead and get some. That's pretty broad, so I don't know if this will suit you guys too much. I'm just going to downsize that, but not sure. With this here, by the way, you can just sort of do this if you want. Decrease the size of the whole thing with the uniform thing, and then I'm going to try out to see how motion blur would look, and I quite like it, but I do want to increase the brightness, so going to the adjustments, increase the brightness. That's quite nice for a bit of detail. And yet I would still like to use the splatters. I think there are some here. I'll use the flicks, and with the brightest color on a new layer, because you can never be too careful with this stuff, I'm just gonna add these here. That's quite nice, quite fun. And as a final part of this, I would really like to add some of the typical stuff that I do with my art, which is add an add layer. And with the hard shading brush, I'm going to use, and as an alternative, the hard airbrush, I'm going in with a really warm color, light. This will do it. And you can really increase that dramatic brightness in here for one, but you can also increase the brightness of the splatter thingies. So grabbing the texture brush again, going over and adding a final highlight to that, and then also going back with the hard shading brush, adding, you know, some glow to the foamy bits that you find are going to be the brightest. You know what, I'm going to have to take, I think this layer is empty. That was me being overcautious. What's this layer? That was the splatters individually. This was the really bright splatter part. I'm going to erase some of this that I did with the old brush to allow the other colors that we've added to come through a bit better, and to make this a bit more focused. Don't want to have that over here. And even with this area of add, I'm just going to erase too much light here. Well, some of the light that is too much anyways. And I also want to make sure that this darkness is quite visible over here. So yeah, you can see a little bit what I've done here. And what I usually do as well is I add, you know, I add magical fairy lights. Yay. With the hard airbrush first, I'm going to add this sort of ambient lighting, although in this case it might need to be turquoise or... Ah, the blue is so pretty. The green is so pretty. I want to cancel it all, to be honest. I'm just going to add another very bright one here. Nah, I don't know. But I will add the magical fairy lights. So with the light pen then, and either a really bright yellow, this will probably do, or you could use a turquoise. I just like to add like these fairy lights that are sort of dancing in the most lit areas, like it's their own personal party. And this is on a separate layer again, because, you know, if it looks crap, you can change it. They're easy to use as extra highlights as well, if you so desire. And then up here, a little bit of fairy light splatter, even smaller to be honest. Going through here, on here. Alright, and I think that's it. You know what, I don't like all of these up here going away, but a couple will do, or just one like that. Yeah, and I think I'm quite happy with that. Obviously I went a bit, you know, haywire over here on the bottom, but yeah, I like it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much if you watched to the end of this. I will link the actual reference down below, and if you want to go ahead and share your art on Instagram, feel free to tag me, all the info down below as well. And yeah, if you have any requests or questions, please drop them down. And if you'd like to follow along to find more of these videos, then please do, because it does mean a lot to me. and my work. So yeah, thank you very much and have a great day.